On a snowy Christmas night in 1923, while the whole town sleeps under a silver sky, one small building still glows with candlelight. Inside, a quiet young operator named Clara sits at her switchboard, listening as the last voices of the night travel along thin, humming wires. Mothers, lovers, and strangers all reach for her in the dark, never knowing that someone gentle is holding every word in her hands. Tonight, if you listen closely, you can follow Clara into that warm little room and hear the secrets the winter sky once carried from heart to heart. The snow had been falling since late afternoon, quietly and steadily, as if the sky had decided to wrap the town in a single, soft sheet of white. By the time night settled over the roofs and chimneys, the streets were nearly empty, their cobblestones hidden under a smooth, pale blanket. Lamps along the main road glowed in small halos, their light swallowed at the edges by the gentle, drifting flakes. At the far end of the street, where houses became sparse and fields began, the little telephone exchange stood with its narrow windows lit by a warm, golden glow. In the surrounding darkness, it looked almost like a lantern that someone had set down in the snow and forgotten, still burning, still patient, while the world grew quiet around it. Inside, the air was warm and faintly scented with wax and dust and wool coats drying by the door. Candles stood in brass holders along the walls and on small shelves between the switchboards, their flames steady but never entirely still. Shadows breathed along the ceiling, soft and slow, like waves moving across a calm sea. The tall wooden boards faced the room like silent guardians, their rows of tiny lamps unlit yet waiting for the night to begin. Clara slipped off her gloves, smoothing the faint dampness from the wool with careful fingers, and hung her coat on the stand by the door. The faint ticking of the wall clock above her seemed louder in the otherwise gentle hush, each second an even, peaceful drop in a quiet pool of time. Anna was already there, perched on her stool before the left-hand board, dark hair pulled back, sleeves neatly rolled. She glanced over with a soft smile that barely disturbed the calm of her face. "Snow is still falling?" she asked, voice low, respectful of the room's stillness, as if it were a chapel dedicated not to prayers but to voices. Clara nodded, unwinding her scarf. "Soft as flour," she said, almost in a whisper. "You can hardly see the tracks anymore." From the far side, Elise waved a gloved hand as she finished setting a fresh candle into its holder. Her movements were unhurried, careful, as though the small flame she was about to light would be something fragile and important. The match scratched softly, then flared, and for a moment, the world was bright and tiny and yellow at the tip of her fingers before settling into a calm, steady light. Clara moved to her own station in the center, feeling the familiar smoothness of the polished wooden stool under her hand as she sat. Her headset waited on its hook, the thin metal band gleaming dully in the candlelight, the earpiece like a small shell ready to hold distant seas of sound. She placed it gently over her hair, adjusting the receiver until it rested comfortably against her ear. The cords hung in patient arcs, their cloth binding slightly worn from years of careful handling. Everything around her seemed to be breathing very slowly. She could hear the sigh of the wind at the window panes, the soft murmur of wax as it melted and settled, the rustle of Anna's skirt as she shifted her weight. The outside world, full of snow and dark and sleeping houses, felt far away, like a dream sliding slowly down into deeper rest. For a long moment, nothing happened. The little lamps remained dark, like tiny eyes closed in slumber along the switchboards. Clara let her gaze drift to the window. Beyond the glass, the night was silver and milk-white, the snow drifting diagonally past the frame. A faint hint of moonlight lay over the fields, turning the flat expanse into something almost luminous. Telephone poles marched away into the dark, their crossbeams and wires traced in fine, delicate lines that caught the snow. To Clara, they looked like tall, quiet sentries holding up threads of night, carrying unseen paths from house to house, town to town. She had often imagined that if she stepped outside and placed her hand on one of the poles, she would feel the faint hum of words passing through the wood like gentle bees in winter, half asleep but still moving. The first ring came softly, a small, chiming note that trembled through the quiet rather than breaking it. Clara straightened, fingers reaching almost without thought. A tiny lamp on her board blinked to life, no larger than a star seen through frost. She could feel her heartbeat slow and steady, matching the rhythm of the clock as she took a cord and fitted it in place with practiced ease. The plug slid home with a delicate click, neat and precise, as satisfying as folding a letter perfectly along its creases. "Good evening, Central," she said, her voice gentle and even, like a blanket being laid over a sleeping child. In her ear, the first voice of the night arrived, a little wavering with distance, but warm. A woman, older, speaking from somewhere along the edge of town, asked to be connected to a number near the river. Her tone carried the faint, bright thread of anticipation, like the shimmer of light on snow. As Clara made the connection, she noticed something. Just as the far line opened and the soft greeting from the other end touched her ear, the candle nearest her flickered in a strange, delicate way, swaying once as though a breath had passed over it. The flame grew slender for a heartbeat, then rounded again, steady and calm. She watched it with a quiet curiosity, her hands still moving with practiced grace between the cords. It seemed as if the light was listening too, bending toward the sound, traveling along the wire, acknowledging the small crossing of distance between two people who could not see each other's faces. When the caller's delighted "Merry Christmas" floated through, the flame steadied further, its glow embracing the brass holder in a soft golden ring. She did not mention it to Anna or Elise at first. It felt like a small secret between herself and the room, something not quite ordinary and yet not alarming. There was no fear in it, only a gentle sense of being watched over, as if the building itself had opened its sleepy eyes to the night's work. The call ended with soft thanks and quiet laughter, and Clara eased the cords free. The lamp on the board winked out, returning to darkness, but the candle beside her seemed to hold a memory of the connection, burning with a slightly fuller, more peaceful glow. The snow outside thickened, the flakes now turning lazily under the faint moonlight, and the telephone exchange settled deeper into its role as the last light in the winter street. More calls came, slow and measured. Each ring was like a knock on a distant door, and each time Clara answered with the same calm tone, guiding voices to one another as if she were laying bridges of sound across rivers of sleep and snow. A young man called from a small inn along the railway, his voice softened by fatigue and the quiet clatter of crockery behind him. He asked to be connected to his parents' home in the old quarter. When his father's voice finally came on the line, rough but warm, the candles along the wall seemed to lean gently forward, as though following the sound. Clara saw them flicker in a soft wave, one after another, before settling back into stillness, and she felt the room grow even more peaceful, as if it were breathing in the shared relief. Between calls, the operators exchanged only a few words, not from coldness, but from a shared respect for the hush. Anna spoke of the church bells she had heard on her way to work, their tones drifting across roofs veiled in snow. Elise mentioned the frozen river, how it had gleamed like a silver ribbon beneath the fading light. Their voices were low and steady, adding to the sense that they were afloat together in a small, sturdy vessel, moving slowly through a deep, quiet sea of winter. The telephone boards with their waiting lamps became constellations, charting invisible paths between homes and hearts. Clara imagined the wires outside as shining lines above the snow, drawn from rooftop to rooftop, like strands of silver thread stitched into a vast, gentle fabric. As the hour grew later, the town outside seemed to recede even further. The few remaining sounds from the street faded until there was only the whisper of the wind and far off, the faintest echo of a carriage's wheels on frozen ground. Inside, the little exchange remained steady and bright, its candles burning patiently, its operators soft-voiced and attentive. Clara felt wrapped in a deep, peaceful quiet, as if the snow, the night, the poles, and the wires had all conspired to create a cocoon for the small circle of light in which she sat. She lifted her eyes once more to the window, watching a single flake slide down the glass, leaving a thin, shining trail. And she thought how every call tonight would be like that. A brief, glowing path traced across the darkness, then fading, but leaving behind a softer, gentler world. The night deepened slowly, like ink poured carefully into a bowl of milk, and the little telephone exchange seemed to float in that soft blue darkness, secure and warm. The candles burned with a steady calm now, their small flames cupped by halos of light. Shadows settled into gentle shapes along the walls, no longer shifting but resting, as if the room itself had decided to breathe in a slower rhythm. Outside, the snow continued to drift down in patient veils, gathering on windowsills and the narrow ledge of the roof, softening corners and blurring edges until the town became a collection of rounded, quiet forms beneath the sky. Clara felt the weight of the headset on her hair and the gentle press of the receiver against her ear as something almost comforting, like the touch of a familiar hand. Her fingers rested lightly on the board, poised between the rows of cords and plugs, ready to lift and place, to guide one voice to another along the hidden lines that laced the night. Another bell chimed, a small, silver sound that seemed to bloom in the hush rather than cut through it. A lamp winked on before her, delicate and precise, a single star in the dark surface of the board. Clara moved with unhurried grace. She took a cord between her fingers, feeling the faint texture of the cloth casing, and fixed it into the jack. The motion was smooth, almost musical, a practiced gesture that had become an extension of her own quiet thoughts. "Central," she murmured, her voice soft and even, welcoming the caller into the warm circle of the room. The line hissed faintly in her ear, like a distant kettle just beginning to simmer, and then a woman's voice came through, hesitant and gentle, the words wrapped in a light, trembling joy. She wished to reach her younger brother in the lower part of town, the one who worked at the little bakery near the river. Clara found the number by touch and memory as much as by sight. Her fingertips slid along the board, lifted another cord, and set the connection moving. A quiet chain of clicks and small shifts until the far line opened like a curtain to reveal another patch of sound. A richer, younger voice answered, wrapped in the muffled clatter of trays and the soft thump of something heavy being set down. In her mind, Clara saw a room hazed with flour, the windows clouded from warmth and breath, the air smelling of bread and cinnamon. When she spoke to announce the connection, her own tone seemed to carry some of that white, powder-soft image. The two siblings greeted each other with overlapping words and little bursts of laughter, shy and bright. They spoke of the snow, of the Christmas loaves shaped like wreaths, of the small tree their mother had placed in the corner of their old kitchen. Clara listened only long enough to be sure the line was safe and clear, then let their voices fall into a gentle background hum in her ear, like a distant song carried on the wind. As the minutes passed and more calls came, the telephone lines outside grew vivid in her imagination. She pictured them stretching from pole to pole over the sleeping roofs, fine as spider silk and shining under the faint touch of the moon. Each ring at the exchange lit up one of those threads, turning it, for a moment, into a path of silver light along which words traveled like small, luminous birds. When she closed her eyes between calls, she saw a web of quiet brightness spread out over the town and beyond. From farmhouse to cottage, from station to inn, from the large square with its dark church tower to the tiny lanes near the river, it seemed to her that the night was no longer empty. It was woven through with these gentle lines of sound, holding people together in a soft, unseen embrace. A call came from farther out, the line more crackling, as if it had to travel under frozen fields and over slow, sleeping streams. The tiny lamp glowed dully, as though it too had come a long, cold way to reach her. Clara answered, and a man's voice greeted her, quiet and careful. He spoke in rounded, measured words, asking to be connected to a rooming house in a town beyond the hills, where his wife was staying for the winter. As she searched for the number, Clara listened to the faint noises behind his voice, the creak of old wood, perhaps, and the hush of a stove, the occasional pop of a coal deep in the fire. She imagined him sitting alone at a small table, the window beside him clouded with frost, the snow piling on the sill outside. When the connection took, there was a pause, then the soft sound of another woman's "hello" from far away. Her voice carried the gentle echo of a stairwell, the murmur of distant footsteps, a door closing softly. Clara announced the call, stepping aside in her mind like someone who has opened a gate. The words that followed were simple, but they glowed. The man asked if she was warm enough, if the room was comfortable, if the landlady was kind. The woman asked about the dog, about the neighbor's boy who swept the steps, about the small fir tree that should have been placed beside the window by now. Their questions folded around each other like hands, not urgent, not dramatic, only patient and full of quiet care. The line crackled from time to time, but the affection in their voices made every interruption seem like a soft sigh rather than a disturbance. As she sat listening to the gentle rise and fall of their conversation, Clara felt the exchange itself become a kind of sanctuary. The boards, the candles, the stools, the worn wooden floor, all seemed to join in the same purpose, to hold these voices with care and carry them safely across distance. The room was no longer just a place of work. It was a small haven where loneliness could weaken for a moment, where words could leave one heart and find another across snow and silence. The wind pressed softly against the windows, making a faint, steady hush, like the sound of a blanket being drawn more closely around a sleeping child. The little flames in their brass holders shone with an unwavering patience, mirroring the steady attention of the women at their posts. Between calls, Clara's thoughts drifted gently back to the world outside. She pictured the river under its thin layer of ice, the water beneath moving slowly, calmly, a dark ribbon under the snow. She imagined the trees along the bank, their bare branches etched against the sky, catching flakes and holding them like soft, white blossoms for a little while. Somewhere, a church stood with its tall, dark tower, the bell still and waiting for midnight. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft, gray-blue threads, merging with the sky until they became part of the quiet air. The town slept in layers, under roofs, under snow, under clouds, all gathered into a peaceful whole by the wide, watching heaven above. And through this gentle stillness, the telephone wires ran like shining veins, carrying the warmth of human voices from house to house. A series of shorter calls followed, quick and light. A young girl asking to wish her grandmother good night, a pair of brothers trading jokes across streets separated by more snow than they wished to walk through, a shopkeeper calling his sister in the next village, reassuring her that the last delivery had arrived and that yes, the oranges for Christmas were safe in the storeroom. Each time, Clara's hands moved with the same careful rhythm, connecting and disconnecting, guiding and releasing. With every completed call, she felt as though a small lantern had been lit somewhere in the dark, another gentle point of comfort in the winter landscape. Now and then, when a lull came and no lamps glowed on the board, she would let her gaze wander to Anna and Elise. Anna's expression was serene, her posture straight yet relaxed, her fingers resting lightly on her lap as she listened to the fading echo of a call. Elise, at the far board, sat with her hands folded for a moment, eyes half closed, as if she were listening not only to the lines but to the snow and the wind outside. They did not need many words between them. The companionship lay in the shared quiet, in the mutual tenderness with which they treated every voice, known or unknown, that drifted through their headsets. It seemed to Clara that the three of them formed their own little constellation inside the exchange, points of steady kindness around which the night slowly turned. As the hour edged nearer to midnight, the calls began to take on a slightly different tone. The greetings lingered a little longer. The pauses between sentences were fuller, as though each speaker were listening to the other's breathing, drawing comfort from the simple fact of presence. Clara connected an elderly aunt to a niece she had not seen in months. The older woman's laughter was thin but bright, like a bell swung gently in a small tower. She connected a tailor to his brother in a neighboring town, and their talk of cloth and orders and measurements seemed to carry hidden beneath it the deeper thread of gratitude that both were safe, both were working, both were here to speak on this cold, beautiful night. Clara's imagination traced each of these threads outward, seeing the lines of sound as glowing paths crossing fields, roads, and rivers, weaving everything together in a soft, silver net that held the world in place. The exchange was very quiet when the last of a cluster of calls ended and the board returned to darkness. For a few moments, no lamps shone, and the only sounds were the soft ticking of the clock and the gentle murmur of the wind. Clara rested her hands on the edge of the board and lifted her eyes to the window. Outside, the snow had grown finer, like powdered sugar sifted through an invisible sieve. The sky above the roofs was a deep, velvety blue, with a few faint stars showing between drifting veils of cloud. The telephone poles stood tall and calm, their wires a barely visible lace against the dimness. In that stillness, Clara felt suddenly that the lines were not only carrying voices, they were listening too, holding the night's softness, the moon's pale light, the quiet dreams of those who slept. A bell chimed again, low and clear, and a single lamp bloomed on her board. Clara leaned forward, her movements fluid and unhurried, and reached for the cord with the same steady grace as before. Somewhere, someone was lifting a receiver, reaching out through the silver threads of the night. As she prepared to answer, the candles at her side seemed to glow a little warmer, as though they knew that another gentle voice was about to join the soft choir of sound that surrounded the little exchange. The room waited with her, peaceful and attentive, as she spoke into the calm. "Central," she said softly. "Good evening, and welcome to the next strand of silver into the woven fabric of this quiet, snow-lit Christmas Eve." The hours slipped by with a softness that made them feel less like numbers on a clock and more like folds in a blanket, drawn one over the other. The little telephone exchange floated in its pool of warm light, a quiet island in the middle of the snowy town. Candles burned in their brass holders with a patient, golden glow, the wax gathering in gentle curves at their bases. The switchboards stood like dark, polished cliffs beneath a sky of tiny, waiting lamps. Clara's hands moved calmly among the cords, connecting, listening, releasing, as if she were weaving a long, silver ribbon through the night. The rhythm of it soothed her, the chime of a bell, the soft lift of her arm, the click of a plug finding its place, the murmur of a distant voice settling into her ear. After a cluster of calls faded into silence and the board cooled into darkness again, Clara slipped the headset back from her ear for a moment and let it rest around her neck. The sudden absence of sound made the room's quiet feel even deeper, like a pond when the last ripple has smoothed away. Anna and Elise were both still at their posts, sitting in the same composed way, but their eyes had that far-off shine that meant their thoughts had drifted somewhere gentle. The clock ticked on, steady and patient, and the candles hummed in their own silent language of light. Clara rose carefully from her stool, the wood creaking just enough to remind her of its age, and crossed the room to the narrow window. The glass was cold beneath her fingertips. A thin veil of frost had crept in from the edges, tracing delicate flowers and fern-like fronds along the pane. She leaned close, her breath misting the clear space in the center, and gazed out into the night. The snow had eased into a finer, softer fall, each flake almost too light to see until it caught a sliver of light. The rooftops were rounded under their white coverings, the chimneys sending up slender threads of smoke that drifted and dissolved into the sky. Beyond the nearest houses, the open fields spread out in a gentle, undulating sheet of silver, the faint rise and fall of the land made tender and smooth under the snow. Above it all, the sky arched deep and high, a calm, velvety blue. Clouds, thin and pale, drifted like sheer curtains, drawing back just enough to reveal scattered stars. They were small, but very clear, points of pure, steady light, not sharp, but soft, as if each one had wrapped itself in a faint halo. Clara felt a quietness settle in her chest as she looked at them. It seemed to her, in that still moment, that the stars were listening. They hung there, patient and gentle, as if their silver gaze could hear the voices that traveled along the wires stretched below them, from village to town, from house to house. She imagined that each word spoken in kindness rose like a breath of warm air, reaching toward those distant lights, and that the stars leaned closer, nodding in slow, bright approval. The telephone poles stood in a line along the road, their silhouettes dark against the glowing snow. To Clara, they looked like tall, kindly sentinels keeping watch over the world below. Their crossbars were like quiet shoulders, and the wires that ran between them resembled strings on some huge, invisible instrument. When the wind moved, the wires hummed with a sound too soft to hear inside the exchange, but she imagined it anyway. A low, silver chord, gentle and distant, accompanying the murmurs that passed along them. She thought of how, somewhere beyond the fields, the river lay under its thin crust of ice, the water gliding slowly beneath, always moving, always dreaming. The stars, the wires, the river, the wind in the bare trees, all of it seemed part of a single, peaceful song that the night was singing to itself. Clara rested her forehead lightly against the window, feeling the coolness seep through her skin, refreshing and calm. She felt small in the best possible way, like a child tucked safely under a quilt, while the grown-up world moved softly in the distance. Here, she stood in a tiny, candlelit room at the edge of a town, and yet her fingertips touched chords that reached far beyond what she could see, crossing hills and valleys, crossing bridges and streams. Each time a bell chimed, she held a small doorway in her hands, a chance for one voice to find another across the silver paths that glimmered under the stars. The thought made her both humble and quietly glad. A soft clearing of a throat in the room behind her brought her gently back. She turned her head to see Elise smiling faintly, her expression questioning but relaxed. "You should not freeze to the window," Elise said in a tone that was more fond than chiding. "The snow will still be there in an hour." Clara smiled and nodded, stepping back from the glass. "The stars are bright tonight," she replied. "They look as if they're listening to us." Elise glanced past her, toward the pale glow of the sky. "Perhaps they are," she said quietly. "Perhaps they are listening to everyone." There was a calmness in her words that pleased Clara, as if her own secret thought had found an echo in another heart. She returned to her stool and settled the headset gently over her hair again, the familiar weight comforting. Not long after, a bell rang. very softly, as if it hesitated even to disturb the silence. The lamp that lit on her board glowed with a faint, flickering light, and the line that came into her ear when she connected it was thin and whispering, like the rustle of paper. For a moment, there was nothing at all but the faint hiss of distance. Then, slowly, a voice emerged, fragile yet clear. It was an old man's voice, worn at the edges, the consonants softened, the vowels drawn out gently, as though each sound was being carried with care. "Good evening, Central," he said, and Clara could hear the careful politeness, the effort to sound strong. She greeted him in the same calm tone she used for everyone, but with an extra shade of warmth, like adding a second blanket over cold hands. "How may I connect you tonight, sir?" she asked. There was a pause, and she heard the faint noises around him. The creak of a chair, the sigh of wind against a window. Somewhere far behind, the slow ticking of another clock in another quiet room. Then he spoke again. I wondered," he began, "if it would be possible simply to speak with someone for a little while." His words were hesitant, not embarrassed exactly, but humble, as though he feared he was asking too much. Clara felt a tender ache in her chest, something soft and deep, not painful, but full. She kept her voice very gentle. "I am here," she said. "You can speak with me if you like." There was another pause, this one filled with a small, grateful breath. "Thank you," the old man replied. "It is only that the house is very quiet tonight. My son and his family are away in the city. They will telephone tomorrow, perhaps. But this evening, the clock sounds very loud, and the wind sounds very loud, and my own thoughts," he trailed off, as if the sentence did not need finishing. She did not rush to fill the silence. Instead, she let it rest between them for a moment, soft and undemanding, like a pillow. Then she asked, in simple, steady words, how the snow lay in his street, whether his stove was warm enough, whether the tree in his sitting room was lit with candles, or only with memory this year. As he answered, his voice grew a little smoother, a little less thin. He described the small fir in the corner of his room, decorated with ornaments collected over many winters, a glass bird with a silver tail, a tiny tin soldier, a paper star his granddaughter had once folded with clumsy, loving fingers. He spoke of the way the light from his single candle reflected in the window, making it seem for a moment as though there were two candles, one in this world and one in another. Clara listened with her whole attention, doing nothing more than adding a word here, a question there, a soft sound to show that she followed each detail. She imagined his room, the worn armchair by the stove, the slippers neatly placed, the book lying open but unread on the side table. She saw the lone candle on the mantel, its flame steady, casting gentle shadows on the walls. Outside, she pictured the snow lying against his door, the night pressing close to the windows, not threatening but vast, a soft, dark ocean. And here, in this small circle of light, sat an old man who had reached out his hand along the wire simply to feel another presence beside him. As they spoke, Clara's eyes drifted once more to the window by her station. Through the faint reflection of her own face and the board behind her, she could see the stars scattered above the town. They seemed closer now, not far, cold fires in the sky, but near, patient, listening lights. It came to her that every word the old man spoke, every quiet question she answered, rose like a tiny, warm lantern into that blue space. The stars received them, held them, and sent back their own soft brightness in return. She felt surrounded. Then, not only by the wood and wax and wires of the exchange, but by something larger and more tender, a sense that the night was keeping watch with her, with them all. Eventually, the old man's voice grew slower, the pauses longer, as if the simple act of talking had eased some knot inside him and left him pleasantly tired. "You are very kind to listen," he said at last. "It feels less empty now. "I think I will sleep soon." Clara's reply was quiet, steady. She wished him a peaceful night, gentle dreams, warmth in his room, and light in his heart. He thanked her once more, and the line faded into a soft, snowy hiss, then into silence. She withdrew the cords with the same care she would have used to close a door, gently behind someone who had just come to rest. When she looked up, Anna and Elise were watching her with mild, knowing eyes. They had not heard the words, but they had seen her stillness, the way her face had softened, the way her hand had hovered by the board as if unwilling to hurry the end of the call. "Someone needed a star tonight," Elise murmured. Clara thought of the old man's single candle, of the glass bird with its silver tail, of the stars above the snow. She shook her head softly. "No," she said, in a voice that felt both humble and sure. He did not need a star. He only needed someone to listen. But in her heart, as she turned back to the quiet board and the waiting lamps, she knew that listening could sometimes shine as brightly as any star. The exchange returned to its gentle rhythm. The slow breathing of the candles, the peaceful ticking of the clock, the hush of wind outside. Yet something within Clara had shifted, very lightly, like a curtain moved by a soft breeze. She understood, more clearly than before, that tonight she was not only arranging chords and numbers, she was tending a web of hearts, keeping them close across distance and darkness, letting each voice know that it was heard under the wide, silver sky. And as she placed her fingertips once more on the edge of the board, ready for the next chime, she felt herself part of the same great listening. The wires, the wind, the river, the stars, and the quiet girl at the switchboard, all keeping watch together through this gentle winter night. The night had grown deeper, and with it, the quiet seemed to thicken, wrapping itself around the little telephone exchange like an extra layer of snow. The candles burned a little lower in their holders, their flames calmer now. The small jumps and flickers of earlier hours softened into a steady, watchful light. Outside, the world lay hushed and silver, the white roofs and fields merging gently into the pale sky at the horizon, so that the town seemed to rest in the hollow of a vast, peaceful hand. Inside, the slow rhythm of work continued, a bell chiming, a lamp blooming on the board, Clara's fingers moving with quiet certainty, the soft murmur of her voice answering and guiding the calls. The air felt warmer, closer, infused with wax and wool, and the faint, pleasant dryness of paper and polished wood. It was the kind of warmth that did not shout, but surrounded, a warmth meant for long nights and patient hearts. Between calls, the three young women spoke rarely now, as if some shared understanding had settled between them with the falling of the late hours. Anna's profile was calm and still against the glow of her board, the curve of her cheek touched by candlelight, the shadow of her lashes resting softly on her skin. Elise, at the far end, had pushed her stool back just a little, sitting with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant as though she could see. Through the walls, out across the snow, their presence was a comfort to Clara, even when no words passed between them. They were like two steady lights on either side of her, keeping her company as she navigated the sea of wires and quiet voices. She felt herself anchored by them, held in a gentle triangle of mutual watchfulness and care. The board before her glowed with a faint, expectant stillness. Most of the tiny lamps were dark, waiting, like buds closed against the cold. Now and then one would spark to life, and after a call, go dark again, leaving behind only the memory of a voice, an image, a small impression of a room or a street or a face that Clara had never actually seen, but felt she almost knew. Each call was like opening a window briefly into another life, letting its warmth brush against her before the shutters closed again. She had just finished guiding a cheerful, breathless conversation between cousins in neighboring streets who had chosen the telephone over trudging through snow. their laughter tumbling into her ear like bright beads when a new bell chimed, lower and softer, from the edge of the board. The lamp that lit in answer to that bell did not blaze. It glowed in a muted, trembling way, as though it had traveled a long, cold distance to reach her. Clara felt the difference at once, in the way her hand moved toward the cord with a touch more care, as if she could already feel the thinness of the line. She took a breath, slow and even, and plugged in, "Central," she said, letting her voice drop into its gentlest register. "Good evening." For a moment, she heard nothing but a faint, snowy hiss, like the sound of frost forming on glass. Then, slowly, a woman's voice rose through that delicate crackle, shaped by distance and winter air. It was not loud, but it carried a firmness beneath the softness, the strength of someone who had stood many mornings in cold kitchens and lit many fires. "Good evening," the woman said. "I would like to reach my son. He works in the factory town by the river, at the boarding house near the mills." There was a pause, not uncertain but heavy, with a quiet longing, as if the woman had been waiting all evening to place this call and had measured out the minutes with tasks that did not quite fill them. Clara asked for the number, and the mother gave it in careful, clear phrases, as though each digit was something solid she placed gently into Clara's hands. While her fingers moved over the board, Clara let her mind build a picture of the woman on the other end, perhaps standing at a small table, one hand resting on the wooden surface, the other holding the receiver. Perhaps an apron still tied around her waist, perhaps a shawl drawn close against the chill that crept in under the door. The connection to the factory town was a long, wandering one, running over hills and under wires weighted with snow, dipping down toward the river valley, where smoke from tall chimneys joined the pale breath of the winter sky. Clara could almost feel the line's path as she worked, each click of a plug an invisible step across some frozen field or narrow bridge. When at last the far end responded, it did so with a faint, metallic ring in her ear, like a bell heard through wind. A new voice came on the line, a brisk landlady's tone muffled by walls and the thick, heavy air of a room full of wool and steam. Clara identified the number, requested the young man, then stepped back in her mind as she heard footsteps, a door opening, the muffled call of his name down a hallway. There was a clatter, a rustle, the slight scrape of a chair. Then a breath, and the son's voice arrived, younger, edged with tiredness, but threaded through with something bright and eager. "Yes? Hello?" he said, the sound of his question hanging in the snowy air of the line. Clara smiled a little, though he could not see it. "Your mother is calling from the village," she said softly. "I will connect you both now." There was a brief, full silence, then an intake of breath that sounded very much like hope. She shifted the cord, completing the circuit, and felt, in the careful arrangement of plugs and wires under her hands, the delicate moment of joining. Mother at one end of the frost-hardened fields, son at the other, the winter darkness between them bridged by a thin, glowing thread of sound. For an instant, Clara hovered, listening to ensure that the connection was clear enough to carry their words. The line was far from perfect. It hissed and crackled like a fire running low. And every few seconds, a faint little pop sounded in her ear, as if some frozen twig had snapped under the weight of snow. Yet beneath those small disturbances, their voices rose and fell, steady and determined. The mother greeted her son with a tone that tried to be brisk, but trembled slightly at the edges. She asked if he was warm enough, if the boarding house food was hearty, if he wore his scarf when he walked to the factory at dawn. He answered with patient reassurance, his words slower than hers, softer, as though he wanted to leave space for every concern she might bring. Clara let their conversation become a gentle background hum, a strand of quiet sound that braided itself with the ticking of the clock and the distant murmur of the wind. In her mind, she saw the mother's kitchen. She saw a coal stove with its iron door shut against the fire, a small pot whispering on top of it, steam clouding the air above. On the table, there might be a loaf of bread cooling under a cloth, a bowl of apples catching the candlelight on their red and gold skins. On the wall, perhaps, hung a simple picture of the Nativity, the figures painted with tender strokes, the child's crib, a small cradle of straw and light. She saw the mother's free hand resting near a wooden chair with no one in it, fingers tracing its worn edge as she spoke. The son's boarding house room appeared to Clara just as clearly, although she had never seen it. She imagined a narrow bed by a frosted window, a chest at its foot, a pair of heavy boots turned neatly on their sides beside a thin rug. The walls would be plain, perhaps with a small picture pinned up, or a postcard, or the corner of a newspaper cutting that held some private meaning. The factory town by the river would smell of smoke and oil and metal during the day. But now, at this quiet hour, she pictured it softened by snow, the harsh angles of machinery and yard smoothed under white, the tall chimneys breathing very slowly into the sky. Somewhere in that softened landscape, a young man hunched over a telephone, his head bent, his voice steadying simply because his mother listened. They spoke of simple things, but each one shone. The mother described the small manger scene she had set up on the sideboard, the same carved figures she had placed there every year since his childhood. She told him how the candle beside the little wooden child reflected in the window, making it look like there were two tiny cradles of light standing watch over the snow outside. She mentioned the church bells that had rung earlier in the evening, their sound carrying over the frozen fields with a softness that made even the oldest houses feel young again. He, in turn, told her of the factory whistles, of the way their sharp calls sliced through the morning fog, and of how, when he stepped outside at the end of his shift, the river sometimes held a skin of ice that broke softly as the current moved beneath. As the line hissed and murmured in her ear, Clara felt the distance between them like a long, pale breath drawn across the landscape. Yet the words they traded seemed to pull that distance tighter, turning it into something strong rather than empty. Each question was like a hand stretched along the wire. Each answer was a hand meeting it. When the mother asked if he had received the parcel with the thick socks she had knitted and the small tin of ginger biscuits, her voice grew particularly soft. When he replied that he had, that the socks were warm as a fire and the biscuits tasted like home, Clara could hear the slight catch in her breath, the quiet exhale of relief, as if she had been holding a worry in her chest and had finally let it go. The candles along the wall seemed to react, almost imperceptibly, to the shape of this conversation. Their flames leaned gently, then steadied, burning a fraction fuller, as though the words had added their own thin layer of warmth to the room. Clara watched the nearest one as she listened. Its light washed the wooden edge of the board in a soft, honey-colored glow, and she imagined that somewhere, far away, another candle was burning in a small village kitchen, its flame reflected in a pair of attentive eyes. The mother would hang up eventually, set the receiver back in its cradle, and turn toward that stove, that manger, that quiet table, all of them touched now with a deeper sense of presence. Her son would do the same in his narrow room, perhaps glancing once at the window where the frost traced fragile patterns, feeling less alone beneath the weight of the winter sky. The call went on a little longer than some, but never felt too long. It unfolded at its own gentle pace, with pauses that were not empty but tender, as if each was an opportunity simply to listen to one another, breathing across the frost. There was no talk of grand plans or heavy burdens, only the careful exchange of comfort, one small, steady piece at a time. At last, the mother's voice grew softer still. She wished him a holy night, a safe sleep, a morning with light enough to see his way clearly. He replied in kind, his final words slow and sure, like the last logs being laid on a banked fire. When the line finally faded into that thin, snowy hiss and then into silence, Clara's hands moved with the same care with which they had started. She withdrew the cords, easing them free as one might lift two joined hands, and gently let them part. The tiny lamp on her board winked out. For a moment, she sat very still, feeling the echo of their voices lingering in her ear, not as sound now, but as warmth. It seemed to her that somewhere in that village kitchen, the candle had burned a little brighter as the receiver went down, sending a thicker, softer ribbon of light into the frosted air. Anna's gaze touched her briefly, a question in her eyes that did not need words. "A long line," she said softly. Clara nodded. "Across the fields," she replied, her voice calm and low. "Across the frost." She turned her head slightly toward the window, where the night pressed close and the stars floated gently above the snow. In her mind, she followed that line one last time, from the little exchange with its candles and boards, over the silvered fields and slow, dreaming river, to a village kitchen where a mother stood by a coal stove, listening to the quiet after her son's voice, and to a factory town room where a young man unwrapped a scarf that smelled faintly of home. As she lifted her hands back to the board, ready for the next lamp that might bloom, Clara felt the world outside as a vast, white cloth spread under the moon, stitched through with hidden threads of sound. She knew now, more than ever, that every call she guided was more than a line of numbers and names. It was a path carved across winter by need and love, a bridge the frost could not break. And as the candles breathed gently around her and the wires hummed softly overhead, she sat poised in the center of it all, a quiet guardian of voices, listening as the night continued to unfold its soft, silver tale. Somewhere in the small hours, when time felt less like a straight line and more like a deep, calm pool, the weather outside began to change. At first, it was only a slight thickening in the sound of the wind, a new note threading itself quietly beneath the steady ticking of the clock. The snow, which had been falling in gentle, feathery curtains, shifted almost imperceptibly into something more insistent, a fine, dense flurry that brushed more firmly against the windows. The glass responded with a faint, continuous whisper, like fabric being drawn slowly over wood. Within the telephone exchange, the candles continued their measured burning, but their flames grew narrower, as if they, too, were listening to the winter's voice rising beyond the walls. Clara felt the change before she fully noticed it, while her hands moved calmly across the board, connecting a daughter in the upper town to her grandfather by the station. Some part of her attention drifted toward the windows, toward the wires outside, toward the unseen sky. The line in her ear carried only the usual soft friction of distance, but beneath it, or perhaps behind it, she sensed a presence, a different sort of movement. The air in the room remained warm, still scented with wax and the faint hint of wool and dust, but there seemed to be a gentle pressure at the edges, as if the night were leaning a little closer against the small building, testing its walls with a careful hand. When that call ended and the board settled once more into temporary darkness, Clara lifted her eyes. The window panes shivered with a light tremor as a gust of wind brushed past, leaving a pale sigh in its wake. Beyond the glass, the world had faded further, the falling snow now so thick that the outlines of the telephone poles were blurred and ghostly. The street lamps along the road were small islands of muted, hazy light, their halos pushed inward by the swirling white. Above them, what little sky could be seen was a low, gray silver veil, drawn close and heavy, hiding the stars from sight. The town had disappeared into a soft, shifting cocoon, and the telephone exchange, with its candles and boards, stood like a single, stubborn point of clarity held within that gentle storm. Another gust of wind came, stronger than the first, and the wires outside responded with a low, humming note, too faint for her ears, but alive in her imagination. Clara pictured them stretching into the snow-blurred distance, humming like taut strings on a vast, invisible instrument. The poles, half hidden, seemed to lean forward slightly, their dark shapes a little softer, like guardians bracing themselves against the weather. The exchange's roof held a deepening mound of snow, and the windows gathered tiny beads of ice around their edges. Yet inside, in the warm, candlelit room, the lamps above the rows of jacks waited with their calm, unblinking readiness, untouched by the storm's quiet insistence. The next call arrived in the midst of that soothing tumult, announced by a bell that sounded almost musical, its chime clear and light against the deeper murmur of the wind. A lamp sprang up, sharp and sure, and Clara answered with the same steady tone she had used all night. The line carried a voice from a house near the outskirts, where the wind's song was louder and the snow's touch thicker against the windows. The caller, a woman with a soft, composed voice, wished to speak to her sister in a coastal town many miles away. As Clara began the sequence of connections, she felt as though she were reaching outward with both hands, guiding a ship through thickening mist toward a distant, welcoming harbor. The path of that call felt longer than most. Even though her fingers moved with the same practiced ease, she imagined the wires running through the storm, passing under the heavy sky, over frozen fields and sleeping villages, over a river that now would look like a strip of muted metal beneath the flurries. Beyond the hills, she pictured the land sloping gradually toward the sea, where waves would be rising and folding under the influence of the same wind that now pressed against the exchange. The house where the sister waited would sit close to that restless water, its windows gathering the damp breath of the tide, its walls remembering the sound of storms from many winters before. When the connection finally steadied and the coastal line opened, Clara heard a different sort of quiet. The storm there had its own voice, a deep, muffled roar that came not from snow, but from the sea's strong breathing. Behind the sister's greeting, she caught the soft insistence of waves breaking, the occasional rattle of shutters tested by the wind, the faint, soothing creak of old beams flexing. It was a deeper, heavier sound than the one outside the exchange, yet it carried the same underlying gentleness, the same sense of a world settling into its winter rhythm, shifting and sighing, but not breaking. As the two sisters began to talk, one wrapped in snow, the other in sea mist, Clara felt that she had become a small lighthouse in the wires, sending out beams of connection through the moving darkness. The image pleased her mind and settled in her thoughts. As call followed call, and the storm outside grew more sure of itself, the exchange seemed more and more to take on that role. The candles, standing in their brass holders along the walls and between the boards, were like a ring of lanterns around a harbor, each one casting a circle of safety into the shadows. The switchboards, with their rows of tiny lamps, became tall, wooden towers marked with stars. Every time a lamp lit up, it was as if a distant ship had signaled through the snow, and every time Clara or Anna or Elise reached for a cord, they answered that signal, guiding it gently through the channels and passages of the lines until it reached the right shore. During a quiet moment, as the wind's low song wrapped itself around the building like a shawl, Anna shifted on her stool and turned her head slightly toward the others. "Do you remember?" she asked in a low, thoughtful voice. "The winter when the river froze so solid that they set lanterns along it, and people walked across as if it were a street." The question slipped into the room as naturally as a log into an already glowing fire. Elise's lips curved in a faint smile. "I was a child," she replied. "My father held my hand very tightly. He said the ice was strong, but I was certain I could hear the water moving underneath." She paused, her eyes drifting toward the window, where the snow smudged the outlines of the world. It sounded like someone whispering secrets in a language I did not yet know. Clara listened, letting their memories blend with the sounds of the night. She, too, recalled winters when the river had hardened and people had tested it with cautious feet, their laughter rising in white clouds as they ventured across. She remembered lanterns swinging from poles driven into the ice, the yellow lights reflected in the dark, frozen surface, making it seem as though stars had fallen and become trapped beneath their feet. Now, with the storm's voice at the windows and the hum of the wires above, those images seemed to belong to the same world as this small exchange, this moment of warmth and vigilance. The lanterns on the river, like the candles in this room, had been points of guidance and reassurance, glowing markers in a vast, cold expanse. They shared other small stories between calls, their voices weaving gently through the warm air. Anna spoke of the first time she had seen the ocean, how it had seemed endless and silver under a pale sun, the waves moving with a slow, majestic patience. Elise described a certain hillside in spring, covered in tiny white flowers that trembled under the lightest wind, making it look as if the earth itself were breathing softly. Clara recalled a childhood night when she had woken to find her mother standing at the window, watching snow fall under full moonlight. The garden transformed into a world of pure, quiet light. Her mother had lifted her into her arms and whispered that some nights were meant not for sleep alone, but for stillness, for listening, for feeling the world become gently new again. As they spoke, the storm continued its patient work outside, but within the exchange, the sense of fragile safety slowly changed into something steadier. The building did not tremble, though the wind pressed its hands along the walls. The windows did not rattle, though the snow brushed them with firmer strokes. Instead, the small room seemed to root itself more deeply into the night, like a tree that had learned to bend and breathe with the weather rather than resist it. The telephone poles outside, their shapes blurred by the swirling white, stood firm and calm, their wires singing in soft, low tones that only imagination could hear. The world might turn restless in the darkness, but the exchange remained a quiet, faithful flame, holding its light aloft. Calls continued to arrive, steady but not hurried, like ships approaching a harbor one by one. A young man traveling on the late train telephoned from a station booth, his voice carrying the clink of glass and the distant hiss of steam. He wished to tell his parents that he would arrive a day later, the weather having slowed the rails. Clara connected him, and as he explained, she pictured the train standing under the storm, its metal sides dusted with snow, its windows glowing faintly in the white. The rails beneath it stretched in parallel lines, cold and silver, disappearing into the moving darkness. Yet above those rails, high and invisible, ran other lines, the telephone wires, and along those lines, her quiet work carried his reassurance into a lamplit kitchen where worry was gently folded away. At one point, a slight flutter passed through the room as a particularly strong gust of wind swept over the roof. One candle flame bowed low, almost touching the rim of its holder, then rose again, straight and sure. Clara watched it, feeling suddenly that the candles were not merely burning. They were standing guard, keeping the darkness at a respectful distance. The exchange itself, with its modest walls and narrow windows, felt larger than before, not in size, but in spirit. It was as if, in response to the storm, the building had turned some inner facet of its character outward, showing itself as a lighthouse of warmth and listening. Its beacons, not beams of light sweeping the snow, but threads of sound traveling along the wires. A peculiar tenderness settled over Clara as this thought deepened. She realized that the wires, the boards, the lamps, and the candles were not merely tools and objects. Tonight, under the watchful storm, they felt alive in their own quiet way, not with the restless movement of animals or the sharp glitter of machinery, but with a kind, patient awareness, as if they understood, as she did, what it meant to keep vigil while others slept. The wires seemed awake and gentle, humming with the memory of every voice they had carried. The boards, dark and polished, held the echoes of countless calls, preserved not as noise, but as a soft, enduring presence. Even the chords she handled with such care felt almost companionable beneath her fingers, their worn cloth, a record of all the times they had bridged distance and eased a heart. As the storm finally began to soften, its fiercer breaths giving way to a quieter, more regular sighing around the walls, the candles burned low but steady, and the board before Clara glowed with its familiar, patient calm. The snow outside still fell, but more slowly now, like a tired dancer coming to rest. The sky, though hidden, seemed to lift a little, and somewhere behind the thinning veil of cloud, the stars waited, ready to appear again. The telephone exchange, this small, candlelit room at the edge of the sleeping town, had held its light through the storm, its wires and boards and quiet operators standing together like a lighthouse in the dark. Clara's hands rested for a moment on the wood, absorbing its gentle warmth. She felt a peaceful weariness, not heavy, but deep and soothing, like the feeling after a long, steady walk by the river. The night was not over. There would be more calls, more voices traveling along the silver threads. But now she knew, with a quiet certainty settled in the center of her, that whatever storms might rise outside, the exchange would hold. The wires would remain kind. The candles would keep their watch. And here, in this small harbor of light, she, Anna, and Elise would go on guiding voices through the winter, one gentle connection at a time. As the night moved past the heart of its darkness, everything seemed to slow and soften, as if the world had taken a deep, quiet breath and now rested in a long, peaceful pause. The storm that had brushed its hands along the walls of the exchange had gentled into a steady, delicate fall of snow. Outside, the flakes drifted down with the unhurried grace of ash from a distant, invisible fire, layering rooftops and branches, smoothing doorsteps and fences, and turning the town into a landscape made of silence. The wind no longer pressed its weight against the glass. It moved instead in easy, wandering currents, stirring the snow into faint spirals that faded almost at once, like thoughts that never quite formed into words. Inside, the candles had burned low, but their flames remained calm, upright, sure of themselves, filling the room with a soft, golden haze. The telephone exchange, in this late hour, felt almost like a chapel. The boards rose dark and steady, their polished surfaces absorbing and giving back the warm light in gentle tones. The rows of tiny lamps were mostly dark, but their very stillness seemed full of possibility, as if each quiet bulb held a folded story, waiting for the moment when it would be called upon to shine. Clara, Anna, and Elise moved in slower rhythms now, their gestures unhurried, their voices lower and more measured than before. Fatigue brushed their shoulders, but in a tender way, like a shawl that one draws closer around oneself rather than a weight that bears down. They were tired, but it was a peaceful tiredness, the kind that comes from a night spent in careful, quiet work. As often happens in such deep hours, the calls themselves began to change in character. The brisk, practical conversations of earlier, full of schedules and arrangements, gave way to something softer. People who had found no time during the busyness of day, or even of evening, now reached for the telephone as the house around them fell still. It was as if the snow had buried all the noise and haste, leaving only those thoughts that had lain at the bottom of the heart, waiting patiently beneath the daily clutter. The voices that came into Clara's ear carried apologies, long postponed, thanks that had never quite found their moment, and hopes that were quiet enough to be spoken only when the world seemed half asleep. A small bell chimed gently on her board, and a single lamp bloomed like a little golden bud. Clara connected the cord and spoke in her calm, familiar tone. On the line was a woman with a careful, composed voice who gave a number in the same town, only a few winding streets away. There was the faintest tremor in her words, however, like the shake of a leaf under a thin layer of frost. Clara did not press, yet she heard the hesitation, the small catch after each digit, and understood that this call belonged to the quieter, more delicate family of conversations that came in such hours. She found the number and made the connection, listening as the ring at the other end echoed through the line with a thin, bell-like tone. When the receiver lifted at the far side, the second voice that answered bore a similar shade to the first, but sharper, with a defensive brilliance like light on glass. The woman Clara had first spoken to did not immediately identify herself. Instead, there was a soft intake of breath, a slight lengthening of silence, as if she were leafing through many possible first sentences and finding all of them weighted with old dust. At last, she spoke her sister's name. The word came out a little cracked at the edges, and Clara could almost see it, like a folded piece of paper taken from a drawer where it had lain too long. The other woman's answering silence was brief, but it held years in it, and in the small, thin pause between their breaths, Clara felt the depth of whatever lay between them. She would not have known the details, even if she had wished to. The line carried no images, only sound. Yet the tone of that sound painted enough. A slight stiffness in the second sister's answer, a trace of surprise that was not displeasure but something cautious and fragile. She said the first sister's name more softly than she might have spoken it in the past, yet with a clarity that proved she had not forgotten it, no matter what else had come and gone. Their voices, so similar and yet so differently shaped by time and habit, hovered for an instant like two birds on separate branches, each unsure whether it dared to take the small, decisive step closer. The snow outside continued to fall, smoothing roofs, mending broken lines in the landscape, covering over footprints and paths. Clara, listening, thought of snow as a kind of gentle, white mail carrier, delivering silence and fresh beginnings to every doorstep. But even snow sometimes failed to carry all the messages that hearts wished to send. Some words were never spoken at the right moment. Some feelings remained sealed in envelopes of pride or fear or simple shyness. Tonight, it seemed, the telephone lines were bearing those letters instead. Phrases that should have been said in kitchens and at gates and beside beds long ago, now traveling along silver wires through the quiet, star-veiled dark. As the sisters' conversation unfolded, it did so with the halting grace of a letter being read aloud for the first time. There were false starts, sentences that changed midway, apologies wrapped in cautious questions rather than direct words. One spoke of a childhood memory, recalling a shared winter morning long past when they had made lanterns from colored paper and hung them in the snowy garden. The other listened, and in her reply, there was the sound of that memory opening, as if she had kept it folded away somewhere safe, untouched by more recent hurts. They did not speak of the cause of their distance in plain terms. Instead, their words circled gently around it, touching its edges with care, as if they knew that the hurt itself was less important now than the fact that they had both survived it, and that it no longer needed to define the path between them. Clara's fingers rested lightly on the cords, her posture still, her breathing matching the slow rise and fall of their voices. In her mind, she saw two houses, not far apart in truth, separated by only a few streets and perhaps a small square. Snow lay on both roofs, candles burned in both windows. In one kitchen, a cup of tea might be cooling on a table beside an empty chair. In the other, a shawl might hang unused on the back of a door. The distance between those houses, in ordinary daylight, might be covered in 10 or 15 minutes of easy walking. Yet tonight, it was being crossed not by footsteps on the snow, but by words on a wire. The wire did what the snow had not been able to do. It carried the letters the snow had forgotten, the messages that had never found their way across town. Around this conversation, other calls came and went, like small boats gliding quietly across a wide lake at night. A man in a nearby village telephoned his older brother in the city simply to say that he was proud of him for having left to study, a sentiment he had never managed to put into daylight speech. A seamstress called her former employer to thank her, in shy, roundabout phrases, for a recommendation given years before that had helped her find work elsewhere. An elderly woman spoke to a neighbor she had once quarreled with over nothing greater than a tree branch and an ill-placed fence. Their voices, too, moved softly, hesitant but drawn by the desire for a gentler tomorrow. To Clara, these calls felt like a handful of delicate papers released into the air. Old notes, unsent letters, finally allowed to drift toward their rightful hands. The sisters' call, however, sank more deeply into her imagination. As they talked, their voices gradually relaxed, smoothing out the sharp edges that had first marked them. Laughter entered cautiously, like a guest uncertain whether it had been truly invited, then stayed. They compared small, ordinary pieces of their lives, recipes, a neighbor's habits, a child's new tooth, the way the snow made the city streets shine under the lamps. Each detail was simple, even trivial. Yet, because of the distance that had preceded this night, every small thing seemed to shimmer with meaning. It was as if they were carefully embroidering a new cloth together, stitch by small stitch, using threads of shared mundane detail to make something strong enough to hold them both. At one point, one sister attempted an apology. The word itself stumbled, came half-formed, then turned into something else, an acknowledgement rather than a direct confession. The other sister answered, not with reprisal, but with a quiet sentence about how the years had changed them, how there was no point counting old bruises when there were new mornings to think about. Her tone was not careless. It was tender and a little tired, as if she had spent many nights making peace with ghosts of their quarrel on her own, and was now ready, calmly, to let them drift away altogether. In the pause that followed, Clara felt the air in the exchange grow almost lighter, as if some unseen weight had loosened its hold somewhere out in the snow-covered town. The candles, low now but steady, cast a softer light on the boards and faces in the room. The shadows had grown longer, but not darker, more like gentle folds than deep wells. Anna and Elise, busy with their own calls, seemed wrapped in the same hush, their profiles serene, their hands moving with an unspoken understanding of the night's new tenderness. They, too, would be hearing the quieter kind of conversation now, the unhurried reminiscence, the hesitant blessing, the simple, "I am thinking of you," that people reach for only when no one else is listening. The whole network of lines, spread out over town and countryside, felt to Clara like a vast, invisible sheet of paper upon which hearts were finally writing what they had long held back. Eventually, the sisters' call slid toward its natural close. They did not pledge grand promises or dramatic reconciliations. Instead, they settled on small, steady things. They agreed that in the new year they might visit one another, not yet fixing a date, but leaving a door ajar. They spoke of sending a small parcel, of exchanging recipes, of keeping each other informed of small changes. Their farewell was simple, almost plain, yet in its simplicity lay a deep, quiet beauty. It was the beauty of something mended, not with showy stitches, but with careful, nearly invisible ones that, over time, would hold just as firmly. When the line at last grew silent, and Clara gently removed the cords, she felt, for a moment, as though she had watched a letter finally arrive at its intended destination years after it had been written. She imagined the snow outside settling over the rooftops of both sisters' homes, covering any old tracks, any traces of past paths that had led away from each other. Under that soft, white blanket, New routes could be imagined, the town's narrow streets redrawn in the mind as gentle threads of possibility. The telephone wires, which that night had carried so many unsent words, hummed softly overhead, as if satisfied with the work they had done. The hours moved on, but the tone of the night remained changed. The calls that followed, even when they were short and plain, seemed to carry an extra shade of softness. People spoke more slowly, as if aware of the delicacy of the moment. The snow outside thickened its quiet, yet in that quiet, there was no sense of loss or emptiness. It felt instead as though the world had placed a finger to its lips, inviting everyone to say only what truly mattered and then to rest. Clara, sitting at her board in the Candlelit exchange, felt herself part of this hush, a careful guardian of the words that now floated through the wires like pale feathers, drifting gently from hand to hand, heart to heart. Her eyes lifted once more to the window, where the night lay like a soft, silver curtain over the town. The snow, the sky, the rooftops, the wires, all of them seemed to be holding their breath for something tender and unseen. She knew that not every letter of the heart could be carried by snow or wire, that some would remain folded away forever. Yet tonight, many had found their way, and that knowledge warmed her like a small, steady fire. As she turned back to her board and rested her fingers lightly on the chords, ready for whatever voice would come next, she felt a deep, quiet gratitude for this gentle hour, for the words that had been spoken at last, and for the soft, silver night that had listened to them with such kindness. Midnight crept toward the town with a soft, unhurried step, as if it were a shy guest approaching a familiar door. The snow outside lay deeper now, resting in smooth, quiet drifts against walls and fences, filling in hollows, rounding sharp stones into gentle mounds. The sky had lifted slightly. The low gray veil of earlier hours had thinned, and through the delicate fabric of cloud, a few faint stars had begun to show themselves again, their light pale and silvery, like distant candles behind frosted glass. The lamps along the street shone into the whiteness with a tender glow, their halos blending with the snow so that ground and air seemed made of the same soft substance. The town, wrapped securely in its winter blanket, slept on under this gentle radiance, roofs breathing out thin threads of chimney smoke into the stillness. Inside the telephone exchange, the night had settled into a calm that was not empty, but full of quiet expectancy. The candles were shorter now, yet their flames held steady. Their golden light turned softer, rounder, like the last glow in a hearth before sleep. The boards stood firm and patient, the rows of tiny lamps mostly dark, waiting like stars that would light only when called upon. Clara felt the late hour in her muscles and in the slow, measured rhythm of her thoughts. But it was a peaceful weariness, softened by the knowledge that the darkest part of the night was passing. Her hands still moved with care when a bell chimed, but between calls, she allowed herself small moments of stillness, letting her gaze rest on the warm gleam of the wood, the quiet curve of a candle flame, or the pale shimmer of snow at the edge of the window. Beyond the town, however, not all was entirely asleep. Along the railway that ran through the valley, small stations kept their own pale lights burning for the sake of late trains and distant travelers. In the hills, villages nested around church spires and wells, their few lamps like scattered fireflies in the dark folds of the land. Farther down by the river, where the water moved beneath its thin skin of ice, hamlets huddled close to bridges and bends, the glow from their windows reflected in the slow, dreaming flow below. It was from these places that the next calls came, drifting one by one into the exchange, each carrying a fragment of life from towns that, though resting, were not completely silent. Clara began to feel that she was listening to a wider world now, a choir of sleeping towns whose voices rose in gentle strands through the wires. A bell rang lightly on the board, and a small lamp bloomed with its usual modest glow. Clara connected the cord and greeted the caller. The voice that answered was that of a young man, his words gentle but slightly breathless, as if he had been walking quickly in a corridor or up a narrow flight of stairs. Behind his voice, she heard the faint rustle of paper, a quiet creak of wood, and the muffled tick of a clock set not on a wall, but on a nearby shelf. His number, gravely and clearly given, belonged to a house in the lower town, near the river, where he wished to reach his wife. But it was not their home he sought. Instead, he asked to be connected to the small hospital in a neighboring town along the railway, where his wife worked as a nurse on the night shift. Clara's fingers moved gently, almost reverently, over the board. She found the line that led toward the hospital, picturing in her mind the rails stretching through the snow, parallel silver lines softened under white, leading to a cluster of buildings where lamps would still be burning for those who could not sleep, for those who needed care. The wires ran above those rails like delicate companions, carrying voices where trains carried bodies. As she completed the connection, she imagined a ward of quiet beds, white sheets reflecting the dim light, windows clouded with breath and frost, and a single figure moving softly between them with a lamp in hand, her steps quiet, her presence calm. When the nurse's voice came onto the line, it did so with a softness that made Clara think at once of cotton and steam. There was the faint echo of a wide room behind her, the distant clink of glass, and the low, rhythmic wheeze of a stove keeping the chill at bay. Clara announced the call, and then, as always, withdrew herself in thought, stepping back inside her mind to let the young couple find each other along the quiet, silver path she had opened. The husband spoke first, his words pouring out gently, like warm water from a jug. He told her that the tree at home was lit, that he had followed all her careful instructions, that the small candles were fixed securely into their holders, and that he had placed the little paper star their child had made at the very top. As Clara listened, she pictured the room he described. She saw a modest sitting room with a tree in the corner, its branches modest but brave, its green made softer by the golden aura of the candles. Ornaments, simple and few, hung from the boughs, a handful of glass baubles that caught the light and broke it into quiet sparks, a string of beads, a few small shapes cut carefully from colored paper. Beneath the tree, perhaps, lay a toy or two, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with string, waiting for small hands in the morning. The young father's voice grew quieter as he described these things, as if speaking more softly made them shine more brightly in his mind and might carry that brightness more clearly across the wires to the nurse's tired ears. The wife's reply, when it came, was filled with a tender kind of longing that did not complain. She asked how the child had looked when seeing the tree lit for the first time that evening, whether the eyes had widened, whether there had been clapping hands, whether there had been laughter or only a hushed, breathless gaze. He answered with care, describing each small gesture as though it were something precious and fragile, to be set gently in words and sent to her like a gift. Clara could hear them both smiling, even though neither of them laughed. The smiles moved under their sentences, quiet but unwavering, like a steady light behind a curtain. Around that single call, the wires carried others of a similar tenderness. A father speaking from a station in the hill country to his elderly parents in a town further down the line, his voice full of snow and train whistles and the promise of a late arrival. A young woman in a village near the river calling a childhood friend who had married and moved away, their shared memories spilling into the quiet like beads from a slowly opened hand. Each voice came from a place where most of the town slept, where houses lay darkened, except for a few isolated spots of light. The station office, the hospital ward, the inn by the crossroads, the priest's small study beside the church. To Clara, it began to seem as though she were hearing not individual calls, but different parts of a single, wide song sung softly over the darkened land. It was fitting, then, that the next call that stayed in her memory came from a priest's house. The line, when it reached her, carried the faint scent of polished wood and candle wax to her imagination, along with the quiet tick of a clock that had likely witnessed many late-night prayers. The priest's voice was gentle and slightly worn, the vowels rounded by years of sermons spoken in cold churches and under bright summer windows. He gave a number in another town, a place along the railway where another church stood and where an old friend of his served a different parish. His request was simple. He wished only to offer a blessing and to hear his friend's voice on this holy night. The connection opened in fits and starts, the distant line bearing the small scars of many winters. Yet, when the second priest answered, his greeting slid into Clara's ear with a warmth that made the fragile connection feel stronger. The two men spoke first of practical things: the number of people who had attended evening mass, the quality of the choir, the difficulty of heating stone walls in such weather. Slowly, though, their talk shifted, deepened. They spoke of the comfort of familiar rituals, the way the candlelight had glowed on faces lined by years and on those still smooth with youth. They spoke of the hush that had fallen over their separate towns when the last hymns faded and the doors had closed, leaving them alone with the echo of the organ and the faint scent of incense and snow. Listening, always at a respectful distance, Clara imagined two small church towers rising in different corners of the sleeping countryside, their bells at rest for the moment, their stones holding the warmth of earlier light. Between those towers stretched a line of wire, thin, silver, quiet, and along that line traveled not only words, but a sense of shared watchfulness. The priests exchanged blessings not with grandeur, but with gentle, measured phrases, wishing each other strength for the year to come, peace in their parishes, and a steady heart for bearing the joys and sorrows of their people. Their voices carried a calm, low music of their own, one that seemed to join itself to all the other sounds Clara had gathered in her mind: the distant sea, the breathing river, the snow on roofs, the sleeping trains, the whisper of pine trees in the hills. As the hours slipped past midnight, the calls grew fewer, but the space between them did not feel empty. It felt instead like a wide, deep silence in which all the whispers and songs of the night could settle together. In that silence, Clara heard, in imagination, the choir of sleeping towns. It was not a choir of loud voices or strong melodies. It was a gentle murmur composed of lullabies sung earlier in the evening and still hanging in the air above cradles, of prayers whispered at bedside lamps and left unfinished as eyes closed, of the slow, even breathing of families gathered under quilts, of the far-off chimes of clocks in towers, each marking time with a soft, round note that dissolved into the snow. Over all of this floated the thin, bright threads of telephone calls, each one a clear, human voice, rising briefly from the hush, and then settling back into it again, like a single note in a long, beautiful piece of music. The telephone exchange felt, in those moments, like the listening heart of that choir. The boards, with their dark wood and tiny lamps, the cords and wires and glowing candles, and the three young women keeping watch together at their posts, all seemed to form a single, attentive presence. Clara felt herself not separate from the night, but woven into it. She imagined that when she bent her head to catch a faint voice on a distant line, she was also bending her ear to the wider song, to the river sliding under ice, to the trees holding the snow in their branches, to the barns and stables where animals shifted in warm straw, to the trains resting on their rails like long, sleeping creatures of metal and steam. Toward the end of the hour, a final call for that quiet stretch arrived, soft and hesitant. A woman from a small village along the hills wished simply to hear her sister's family sing one verse of a carol by their tree. The connection crackled, wavered, then held. Clara heard, as if from far away, a cluster of voices, some deep, some high, some clear, some a little off-key, blend together in a gentle, familiar tune. The sound was thin through the wire, but the feeling was rich and full. Candles glowing, branches trembling slightly as hands brushed them, eyes shining, little shoulders relaxed. It was only a verse, only a few lines. Then they wished each other good night, and the line went quiet once more. When Clara withdrew the cords and the lamp dimmed, the silence that followed felt almost like the last note of a hymn hanging in the air of a church. It did not vanish at once. It lingered, soft and silver, in the corners of the room, mingling with the candlelight and the faint glow from the snow outside. She let her hands rest for a moment on the edge of the board and closed her eyes. She pictured the map of all the towns and villages and scattered houses she had touched that night, not as lines and names, but as small pools of light threaded together by quiet voices. In her mind they rose, all those lights and words and songs, drifting into the winter sky to form a gentle choir that the stars, now appearing in greater number, might listen to with their own distant, peaceful attention. When she opened her eyes again, the exchange was as it had been, warm, small, steady. Anna sat at her post, serene, her face softened by the candle glow. Elise watched the window for a moment, then returned her gaze to the board. The wires above the roof hummed their secret, silver song. Outside, the choir of sleeping towns continued, mostly silent, but full of dreams and soft breaths, of hearts resting and hearts still awake. And Clara, in the center of it all, felt quietly honored to be the one who listened, who guided, who held the threads of sound that tied the night gently together. The hour after midnight unfurled with a quiet that felt almost luminous, as though the darkness itself had thinned and taken on a soft silver sheen. The snow outside lay deep and still, its restless dancing finished for a while, its surface smoothed into long, gentle curves that followed the lines of roofs and roads and fields. The sky above the town had opened more fully. The clouds were now only faint veils drifting in slow, transparent bands, and behind them, the stars watched with a calm, distant tenderness. Their light touched the snow and the telephone wires and the slim silhouettes of the poles, turning everything that was dark into something edged with silver. The town slept more deeply now. The late trains passed more rarely, and even the wind moved in softer, slower breaths around the corners of the buildings. Inside the telephone exchange, the atmosphere echoed this stillness. The candles had burned low, their bases ringed with small pools of cooled wax, their flames narrower but no less steady. The room felt warmer for the lateness of the hour. The accumulated heat of bodies and candles and the slow ticking of the clock seemed to rest in the wooden floor and boards, rising in a gentle, invisible haze. Clara's movements had grown quieter, if such a thing was possible, each gesture flowing into the next with that particular grace that comes when mind and hands know their task so well they hardly need to think. Anna and Elise shared the same slow, peaceful rhythm. They did not need to speak to understand one another. The night itself seemed to hold them in a shared, calm understanding. The calls, too, had begun to thin, drifting in at longer intervals as the sleeping towns yielded more fully to dreams. Each one that did arrive felt special, like a single snowflake noticed against the wide whiteness of the sky. Clara guided them with the same care she had given to the earlier stream. A man in the next village reassuring his sister that the roads were passable, a grandmother telling a grandson about the small gift hidden in his stocking for mourning, a friend calling another just to say that she was thinking of her beneath the same winter moon. When those voices faded and the board's tiny lamps went dark again, the silence that followed was no longer the silence of expectation, but the silence of rest, peaceful and deep. For a span of minutes that might have been long or short, Clara could not quite tell. No bells rang at all. The telephone boards stood like dark, patient hills under a sky of unlit bulbs. The only sounds in the exchange were the steady, even ticking of the clock, the faint crackle of cooling wax, and the soft, almost inaudible rustle of fabric whenever one of the young women shifted slightly on her stool. Clara let her gaze drift to the window. Beyond the glass, the world had taken on a dreaming quality. The snow-reflected starlight gave everything a pale glow, so that even shadows were gentle, washed with a hint of silver. The telephone wires, stretched between their tall guardians, looked like delicate strokes drawn across the sky, quiet and sure, a script the night had written and laid gently over the town. It was in that deep, silver stillness that the bell rang. It was not louder than any other call, nor sharper, but something in its tone made Clara lift her head with a new kind of attention. The chime seemed to hang in the air for a heartbeat longer than usual, a clear, pure note that felt less like a summons and more like the beginning of a soft melody. A single lamp awoke on her board, its small light very steady, almost as if it had been lit by a knowing hand rather than by the usual invisible mechanism. She did not rush. She allowed herself one slow breath, and in that breath, she felt the room gather itself around her. The boards, the candles, the night outside, the wires above. Then, with her usual calm precision, she took the cord and fitted it into place. "Central," she said, her voice gentle and even, wrapped in all the warmth and softness the night had gathered. "Good evening." The line answered her with silence at first, but it was not the thin, empty silence of an unsteady connection. It was a deep, velvety quiet, like the hush inside a church after the last echo of song has faded, or the stillness of a winter forest under fresh snow. In her ear, there was no hiss, no crackle, only a very faint, low hum, as if the wire itself were breathing slowly. Clara waited, her gaze resting on the candle nearest her, watching the small flame stand straight and attentive. Then, softly, a voice began to speak. It was difficult for Clara to tell if it was a man's voice or a woman's, or whether it was young or old. It seemed to rest somewhere in the middle of everything, clear but gentle, neither high nor low, carrying no accent she could place, and yet sounding strangely familiar, as though she had heard it before in a dream or in the cadence of her own thoughts. The voice greeted her by name. "Good evening, Clara." The sound of her name, spoken from an unseen distance along the wire, made a small, quiet shiver pass through her. It was not fear. There was no cold edge in it at all, only a gentle astonishment, like the feeling of opening a door one expects to be locked and finding it softly ajar. She did not ask how the caller knew her. The question rose and faded harmlessly, like a snowflake blown against the window and then sliding away. There was only kindness in that tone, and she felt herself relax further, as if leaning into a cushion. "You have had a long night," the voice continued, very softly. "A gentle night, but long. You have carried many words across the snow." There was no doubt in those phrases, no hesitation. It spoke not as one who guessed, but as one who had been watching, patient and calm. The line remained perfectly clear, though the sound was hushed, as though the speaker stood not far from her, perhaps just behind her shoulder, or at the doorway of the exchange, wrapped in the same candlelight. Clara found that her own voice, when she answered, had grown even quieter than usual, as though she were afraid to disturb the delicate peace of the moment. "Yes," she said, words simple, steady. "We have had many calls." She did not speak of Anna and Elise, of the storm, of the mothers and sons and old friends, yet she felt, strangely, that the voice on the line already held all that knowledge gently folded within it. There was a small pause, and in that pause, the candle flames did a curious thing. They did not flicker outward, as when a draft touched them, but seemed to draw inward for a heartbeat, as if they were listening too. "I have heard them," the voice said. "All the wishes and blessings and small, brave hopes traveling along the wires like tiny lights. You have guided them with such care. You have been gentle with every voice, even when no one will remember your name when they speak of this night." There was no sadness in these words, only a calm statement wrapped in something like gratitude. Clara felt a warmth rise in her chest that did not come from the candles. She had never sought thanks for her work. The satisfaction it gave her was quiet and private, yet to hear it acknowledged so simply, so tenderly, filled her with a peaceful glow, like the spread of heat from a hidden ember. "Who are you?" she asked at last. The question formed without urgency, like a snowflake drifting slowly downward. It felt almost unnecessary to ask, and yet the shape of the words wanted to exist. The voice on the line gave the slightest hint of what might have been a smile, if a smile could be heard. "I am a friend of the night," it replied. "A friend of snow and wind and wires and candles. A friend of those who keep watch while others sleep. You may think of me as you wish, as a traveler passing through the lines, as a thought carried on the wind, as the gentle ear that sometimes listens when no one else is awake." The explanation was no explanation, and yet it soothed rather than puzzled. Clara felt that she understood without needing to put the understanding into any harder shape. The voice did not ask to be connected to any number. It did not give a name or a location. It asked, instead, a few simple questions about her: whether she was warm enough, whether Anna and Elise were well, whether the town outside was peaceful under its snow. Clara answered in calm, steady phrases, describing the low candles, the resting boards, the quiet breathing of the night. As she spoke, she realized that her own words were forming a small portrait of the exchange, as if she were painting a picture aloud for this unseen caller. The faint gleam of brass candle holders, the pale glow of snow through the window, the wires overhead drawn like soft shadows against a star-touched sky. When she fell silent, the voice responded not with more questions, but with something that felt like a blessing gently poured into the line. "Then let the wires rest around you," it said softly, like branches around a bird. "Let the candles keep their soft watch. Let your hands, which have worked with such kindness, be surrounded by quiet. You have joined hearts across fields and rivers, across frost and distance. You have made the night softer for those who were alone. Now the night wishes to be soft for you." Each sentence arrived with the slow grace of falling snow, light and sure, settling on Clara's thoughts and warming them. Her shoulders loosened. Some small tension she had not even known she carried seemed to melt away, as ice melts in the first true light of morning. The voice continued in the same tender tone, and now the words seemed not only for her, but for the whole little room. "May every call you have guided tonight leave a thread of light behind it, so that the town will wake surrounded by an invisible net of gentleness. May those who spoke harsh words in other days find that, after tonight, their voices soften. May those who felt alone discover, when they rise, that their hearts remember a warmth they cannot quite name. And may you, Clara, and your sisters at the board carry the peace of this night within you like a hidden lantern, glowing softly, even when the candles have gone out." In the stillness of the exchange, the words felt almost tangible, as if they had been woven into the very air. Clara did not reply at once. She let the blessing sink in, feeling it settle gently over her thoughts, over the boards, over the sleeping town beyond the walls. She glanced toward Anna and Elise. Neither of them had heard the words, for their headsets were resting on their necks. Their boards lay quiet, yet some subtle change had touched them as well. Anna's posture had relaxed, her shoulders eased, as if a soft hand had brushed across them. Elise's face bore a faint, peaceful smile, as though she had just remembered a pleasant dream. The candles, too, seemed to burn with a new steadiness, their flames small but unwavering, like tiny guardians set at regular intervals around a sleeping child. "Thank you," Clara said at last, and her voice, though quiet, felt deeper, steadier. The gratitude in it was not only for herself, but for everyone whose voices had passed through her hands tonight, and for the little exchange itself, and for the snow and the stars and the kind, unseen presence that had decided to speak. "We will keep our watch," she added, "as long as there are voices to guide." The answer she received was a soft, approving murmur that might have been words, and might have been only a gentle sound, like wind around a corner or water slipping under ice. Then, slowly, the line began to fade, not in the usual way, with crackles and breaks, but as a candle flame fades when it has burned out its wax, thinning, narrowing, becoming a thread of light, and then a faint glow, and then a memory of warmth rather than light itself. The low hum in her ear grew softer and softer, until it was indistinguishable from the silence. The lamp on her board, which had shone so calmly throughout the call, dimmed with equal gentleness and went out, leaving not emptiness, but a sense of something completed, like the closing of a well-loved book after the last page has been read. Clara sat very still. The exchange around her seemed to breathe. The boards and candles and walls and windows held a new kind of quiet, richer and more peaceful than before. The wires above the roof hummed softly in her imagination, not with any particular sound she could place, but with a feeling of kindness. She knew that in the morning, the snow would show nothing of this call. No footprints would lead to the exchange from any unseen place. No record in the ledger would name the caller. Yet Clara felt, with a gentle certainty, that something real had happened, something as delicate and as sure as frost forming on glass. In time, other bells would ring. Other voices would come and go along the wires, bringing their small joys and worries into the warm circle of candlelight. The night still had hours to offer, and she would be there to listen, to guide, to connect. But now, there was an added softness in her task, a new awareness that, somewhere beyond names and numbers, the night itself listened and blessed, wrapping its long, silver silence around those who kept vigil. She rested her hands lightly on the edge of the board, let herself take one slow, peaceful breath, and lifted her gaze for a moment to the stars beyond the window, shining gently over the snow-covered town. Then, with her heart quiet and full, she lowered her eyes again to the waiting lamps, the silent chords, and the soft, patient boards, ready to answer the next call that would rise out of the winter stillness and travel toward her along the quiet, silver line. Midnight had passed, yet the echo of it still lingered in the air like a quiet fragrance. Earlier, the church bells in the center of town had rung out with their clear, measured voices, counting the 12 strokes in slow, deliberate intervals. Even here, at the edge of the streets, the sound had reached the telephone exchange, softened by distance and snow. The tones had floated over the roofs and along the chimneys, slipping through the narrow alleys and across the sleeping fields. They had come to the little building as a faint, silver shimmer, pressing gently at the windows, then sinking into the wooden walls and floor as if to say that the night had turned a page, that a new, quieter chapter had begun. Now, that music had faded, leaving behind only the memory of rounded notes, dissolving into the soft brightness of the winter sky. Outside, the town lay wrapped in an even deeper stillness. The snow, which had spent hours in restless motion, had grown almost completely still, resting on roofs and railings and hedges in smooth blankets that reflected the faint light from the stars. The clouds had thinned further, pulled apart into delicate wisps that drifted across the sky like strokes of pale gauze. Between them, the moon, now high and clear, cast its soft silver over the streets, washing the world in a luminous hush. The telephone poles and their wires stood under this moonlight like slender ink lines, their shadows falling softly onto the snow. The last smudges of smoky breath from chimneys hung in the air in thin, gray streaks, barely moving. It seemed as if everything that could sleep now slept, and only a few small lights remained to keep watch with the stars. Within the exchange, the late hour wrapped itself around the three young women like a quiet, warm shawl. The candles had burned down to modest pillars, their flames small but steady, drawing close to the brass rims of their holders. The air was thicker with the gentle scent of wax and a faint, comforting trace of smoke. The boards rose in their familiar positions, yet their presence felt softer now, as if they, too, had grown a little drowsy. The rows of tiny lamps remained mostly dark, their glass faces dulled by rest, with only an occasional, brief glimmer to remind Clara that the wires still lived, that the world had not slipped entirely into silence. The clock above them went on marking time, its ticking neither hurried nor slow, each second a calm footstep in a corridor of sleep. The calls that did come now were few, and they arrived with the careful restraint of someone tapping lightly at a door late at night. Clara answered each with the same gentle steadiness that had carried her through the earlier hours. But now her voice had taken on an extra softness, as if it were wrapped in velvet. A man from a small inn near the station telephoned a cousin only to say that the last guest had gone to bed and that the night was peaceful. A young woman called her aging father to tell him that she had placed an orange and a small book on the chair by his bed, and that he would find them when he woke. Another voice, thin with sleep but touched with tenderness, belonged to a mother who had risen briefly to check on a child and decided on a sudden impulse to call her sister in another street just to whisper, "All is well here. I hope it is well there, too." These calls were short, like small lamps lit briefly in passing, and when they ended, the darkness that returned was not empty but enriched by their gentle glow. Between these scattered conversations, Clara felt the weight of the night on her limbs, but it was a pleasant weight, like a thick quilt laid over shoulders. Her hands still moved with care whenever a lamp shone, yet when the board rested, she allowed them to lie quietly on the polished wood. She became aware of the slight warmth beneath her fingertips, the faint smoothness worn there by years of other hands, other nights. Her thoughts moved more slowly and cohesively, no longer skipping from one voice to another, but settling into a broad, reflective calm. It was as if the night, having asked her to listen to many individual stories, now invited her to consider them as a whole, to see the pattern they had woven together. She realized, as she sat in that candlelit pool of silence, that what they had been doing all these hours was more than merely connecting calls. Each conversation, each brief exchange of words, had added a thread to something larger, something invisible but very real. She pictured the night behind her as a long, softly glimmering tapestry stretched over the town. Into it had been woven the mother's voice, crossing the frost to reach her son, the old man's hesitant request just to hear another soul, the sisters' careful words as they stitched an old tear in their bond, the laughter of cousins, the calm blessing of the priests, the hymn sung down a distant line. These threads of sound and kindness had crossed and overlapped in ways she could not fully trace. But together, they formed a fabric that now lay gently over every roof and doorway, a quiet protection against the dark. Anna, at her own board, seemed to share some part of this feeling. When a call ended and her lamps fell dark again, she would sit for a moment, with her hands folded, eyes distant, as though she, too, or seeing something that did not exist in wood and metal alone. Elise's gaze went often to the window, where the moon now shone with a cleaner, clearer light. At one point, in a quiet spell, Elise spoke in a low, dreamy tone. "The bells sounded different tonight," she said, "as if they were ringing into water, or into snow, or into something softer than air." Clara understood. She had felt it too, that the bells had not merely marked the hour, but had called out to all the scattered pieces of the evening and drawn them together into one gentle moment. The boards grew quieter. The bells from the church, having shared their song, were now still. The distant sounds of the town had dwindled until only the faintest hints remained. Perhaps the clink of someone banking a stove, the distant creak of a barn door, a dog shifting in its sleep and giving a single, muffled bark before settling again. The telephone wires hummed softly overhead, but their song now was less insistent, more like a long, contented sigh. Clara felt that the exchange had passed through the busy heart of the night and had reached its far, lucid edge, where everything was touchingly clear and very simple. In that clarity, memories of the night's calls rose and fell within her, not in sharp detail, but in gentle impressions. The sound of an old woman's laughter, fragile yet stubborn, the trembling breath of the man who had asked only for company, the rhythm of a child's excited voice describing a tree, the quiet pause when sisters ran out of words, but not out of feeling. These moments no longer felt separate. They came to Clara like waves on a very calm shore, each one leaving behind a small, cool trace before blending into the larger tide. She realized that she could not remember every name, every number, every address she had written in the ledger, but she could feel, very clearly, the warmth that had flowed along the wires, the way it had passed from heart to heart, and then slowly dissolved into the peace of the sleeping town. A final, small cluster of calls came and went, like the last sparks rising from a slowly dying fire. One was from a baker who had risen early to begin kneading dough for the morning bread. He called his sister in the upper town to tell her that the ovens were already warming the cold air and that he had put aside a small loaf in a special shape for her children. Another came from a young apprentice at the railway sheds, who wanted to reassure his mother that he had found a warm corner near the boilers to rest in between tasks. These conversations carried with them the first faint hint of morning, the sense that not everything was drifting deeper into sleep. Some few had already turned their faces toward the coming day, preparing it quietly, while the rest of the town lay dreaming. Then, quite suddenly, yet gently, there were no more calls. The board before Clara lay still, all its lamps dark. The bells remained silent. The wires seemed to settle into a peaceful hum. For the first time in many minutes, perhaps even longer, the exchange held a complete, unbroken silence. Clara looked up at the clock. The hands had slipped further toward the small hours before dawn, that delicate time when night has done most of its work, but has not yet confessed its nearing end. She glanced at Anna and Elise. They met her eyes with soft smiles, companions in this shared watch, their faces pale and calm in the candlelight. It was at this point that they began, quietly and without any sense of haste, to tidy their small world. There was no formal announcement, no signal. It was simply that the lull had become long enough and the night deep enough that their hands inclined naturally toward gentle order. Clara reached first for the cords that lay in loose curves across her board, smoothing them into neat, relaxed loops, careful not to snap or twist them. Each movement was slow and deliberate, as if she were combing out the hair of a sleeping child. Anna and Elise did the same, aligning their plugs, straightening their notes, closing ledgers with a soft, respectful touch. As Clara worked, she felt that she was not merely tidying tools, but laying to rest the night's own threads. The cords she coiled had carried voices. The lamps she let rest had once shone for the sake of a single, fleeting connection. Now, as she smoothed and arranged, she gave back to the boards a sense of calm readiness, as if tucking them gently into bed after their long vigil. The candles flickered, but did not waver, their flames blessing each small motion with a bath of warm light. The clock went on ticking above them, each passing second now feeling less like the deep stride of night and more like the light, careful step of morning approaching on soft feet. When the chords were arranged and the ledgers closed, the three women sat for a moment, simply breathing the quiet. No one spoke. Words seemed unnecessary, almost too heavy for such a fine, weightless stillness. The room around them, with its simple furniture and scuffed floor and modest boards, felt at once very small and immeasurably wide. It contained in that moment the echo of all the voices that had passed through it since evening, an invisible chorus that did not disturb the silence, but enriched it. The candles burned low and gentle. The white outside the windows glowed faintly under the moon, and the first, almost imperceptible brightening of the eastern sky. Clara lowered her eyes to her open hands, resting on her lap. They showed a faint film of wax dust and pencil marks, a few fine lines of tiredness along the knuckles. Yet when she flexed her fingers slightly, they felt warm and steady, anchored by the knowledge that tonight they had helped weave a net of comfort across the sleeping world beyond these walls. She thought once more of that tapestry in her mind, that soft fabric made of voices and wishes and fragile laughter, now draped, like the snow itself, over the entire town. The bells had done their singing, and now their music lived on in the quiet that followed. The moon had taken up the watch, spreading its gentle light over roofs and wires and trees, bathing everything in a silver that seemed to whisper, "Rest now. You are not alone." The night was not entirely finished. Morning had not yet arrived. But in this pause, this hush after the bells and before the dawn, Clara felt that something essential had been completed. The busiest calls were over. The deepest confessions had been spoken. The quiet blessings had been given and received. The telephone exchange had done its work with care. The wires above, the poles in the snow, the hidden cables crossing fields and rivers, all rested now, holding the peaceful weight of a town tucked safely beneath a sky of slowly fading stars. And in the small, candlelit room, three young women sat like keepers of a gentle flame, poised at the edge of night, waiting calmly for the first faint touch of morning to begin. The night loosened its hold so slowly that, at first, no one would have noticed the change unless they were watching very closely. The darkness did not lift in a sudden gesture. It thinned, almost imperceptibly, at its edges, as if some unseen hand were carefully diluting ink with clear water. Beyond the windows of the telephone exchange, the sky in the east deepened from black to a softer, velvety blue. The stars, which had watched so patiently through the long hours, began to fade one by one, not abruptly, but with a gentle modesty, their bright points softening into the pale, wide light that was slowly gathering behind the roofs and the distant line of hills. The snow reflected this change with its usual quiet readiness, taking on a faint, cool glimmer like the sheen of silk when the first hint of morning touches it. Inside the exchange, the candles had burned themselves low. Their flames were now small and oval, cupped close to their wicks, casting warm halos that barely reached the furthest corners of the room. Shadows rested more softly along the walls, no longer shifting, simply lying in calm folds. The boards stood in their familiar places, silent and watchful, their lamps dark, their cords neatly gathered. The clock above them showed an hour that belonged to neither night nor day entirely, one of those delicate thresholds when the world seems to hold its breath. In this pause, Clara, Anna, and Elise sat together in a gentler stillness than at any time before. The strain of attention eased now that the wires had grown quiet leaving only the echo of their work in the air. Fatigue lay on their shoulders, but it was a tender weight. Their eyes were shadowed yet clear, their motions slower but precise. They did not speak loudly. When they did speak at all, they used only a few words, each one set down carefully in the hush, as if they did not wish to disturb the peace that had settled over the room. Anna rubbed her hands together once, briskly but without impatience, as if warming not just her fingers, but the memory of all the chords they had moved. Elise stretched her back with a small, graceful motion, then smoothed her skirt with a faint, thoughtful smile. Clara felt her own body's quiet ache, the mild stiffness in her neck where the headset had rested, the faint tremor in her hands that comes when work is done and muscles, no longer occupied, begin to remember their weariness. Yet beneath that tiredness, there was a deep, tranquil satisfaction. Clara knew, in a way that did not need words, that they had been part of something gentle and important. The night's many voices had passed through their hands and ears and hearts, and now those voices lay sleeping somewhere under quilts and roofs, wrapped in the same slow-coming light that was seeping into the sky. The mother and son, the old man, the sisters, the priests, the nurse and her young father, the scattered cousins and friends, and quiet, hopeful souls. They had all spoken, had all been heard, and now their stories rested together under the soft blanket of the town's dreams. The small bell above the door, which had remained still for many hours, gave a faint, accidental tremble when a draft slipped through a seam in the frame. Its tiny chime sounded like the echo of distant sleigh bells, or the last note of a long, faded song. The sound made Clara realize all at once that she wished to see the dawn more fully, not only through the blurred glass of the window. Something within her, perhaps the part that had watched the stars in the early evening, longed to step briefly out of the circle of candlelight and stand beneath the widening sky. She glanced at Anna and Elise, finding in their quiet faces the same soft desire and the same unspoken permission. The calls had ceased. The board was at peace. For a few minutes, the wires would not need her. "I will just look at the morning," she said softly, more as a courtesy than a request. Only for a moment. Anna nodded, her eyes kind and tired. "Bring a little of it back with you," she replied in a gentle murmur. Elise smiled faintly. "If you see anything beautiful," she added, "tell it we are still awake." Their words brushed against Clara's heart like soft wings. She rose from her stool, felt the floorboards give a small, familiar creak under her weight, and reached for her coat and scarf, which hung where she had left them at the long-ago start of the shift. The wool smelled faintly of cold air and snow, of the early night that now seemed so far behind them. As she wrapped the scarf around her neck and slipped her hands into her gloves, she felt as though she were preparing to step from one world into another, from the warm, humming cocoon of the exchange into the wide, silver quiet of the sleeping town. The door, when she opened it, sighed gently on its hinges, and a breath of cold, clean air drifted in, touching the candle flames so lightly that they only bowed for a heartbeat before straightening again. Clara stepped through, and the door closed softly at her back, the latch making a small, definite sound that seemed to draw a graceful line between inside and outside. The cold met her kindly. It touched her cheeks and forehead, cool and pure, without malice. The air smelled of snow and distant smoke, and the faintest ghost of pine. The town lay before her like a drawing made in shades of pearl and silver. Roofs were smoothed into gentle slopes beneath their blankets of snow. Chimneys rose from them like dark, patient markers. The streets were almost untouched, their surfaces shining softly under the pale glow of the sky, marked only here and there by the shallow traces of a cart's wheels or a lone traveler's boots, already softened by new flakes. The telephone poles stood in a graceful line along the road, their wires stretched above her like strings on some quiet instrument that the night had finished playing. In the east, behind the dark suggestion of distant hills, the sky brightened ever so slightly, moving from velvety blue toward a tender, washed-out gray that held hints of pink and gold in its deeper folds. The moon, which had kept its watch with such patient silver, now hovered lower, its light thinning into a pale memory of itself, ready to give way to the softer clarity of day. A single star still burned clearly near the horizon, refusing for a few extra moments to vanish. Its stubborn glow comforted Clara. It seemed to her like a promise that the gentleness of the night would not be completely lost when the sun rose. It would remain, tucked away in quiet corners, in the folds of hearts, in the small kindnesses that people would carry into their waking hours. Clara stepped a little further from the exchange, her boots crunching lightly on the crust of snow. The sound was delicate and pleasant, not sharp, as if the snow accepted her footsteps without protest. She turned slowly in a small circle, letting her gaze travel over the familiar shapes rendered strange and magical by the hour and the light. The bare trees along the road held out their branches as if offering handfuls of silver lace to the sky. Each twig carried a fine line of frost that caught and softened what little light there was. A row of fences, dull and ordinary by day, now traced a gentle pattern across the snow, their shadows ashamed to be anything other than pale whispers. The town seemed to be breathing in its sleep. Here and there, thin curls of smoke rose from chimneys where fires had been banked through the night. Behind some shutters, a faint glow hinted that someone had risen early, a baker perhaps, or a mother nursing a child. Yet no voices carried across the air, no wheels rattled, no doors banged. All was held in a delicate balance, a moment when neither night nor day quite ruled, and both seemed to coexist in a peaceful truce. Clara felt herself at the very center of that quiet, standing small and still. The exchange at her back, the town before her, the sky above, the snow below, all joined together by the thin, gentle lines of the wires that had carried so many tender words. She closed her eyes for a moment and simply listened. She heard almost nothing, and yet that almost nothing was full. The faintest stir of a breeze among the branches, the soft settling of snow as it adjusted to its own weight, a very distant, far-off sound that might have been the river shifting under its ice. In that layered silence, she heard, as if from a long way off, echoes of the night's voices. Not their exact words, not their individual tones, but their shared feeling, the warmth of concern, the tremor of hope, the quiet sigh of forgiveness, the soft cadence of blessings given and received. All of it seemed to rise slowly from the roofs and streets like a breath, mingling with the paling stars and the thinning moonlight, as if the town itself were exhaling a gentle, contented sigh. When she opened her eyes again, the eastern sky had brightened another shade. A narrow band of pale gold, tender and washed with rose, touched the far edge of the world. It did not yet cast strong shadows. It only suggested, hinted, promised. Clara watched it for a few breaths, then felt a soft tug inside her, a reminder that the exchange, with its candles and boards and resting companions, awaited her return. She turned back toward the small building. Its windows glowed dimly from within, the candlelight now barely visible against the growing dawn, but still there, still steadfast. It looked to her like a lantern that had burned all night, and now, seeing that the day was ready to take over the watch, would soon allow its own flame to rest. She slipped back inside, and the door, closing behind her, returned her to the warm, familiar scent of wax and wood. Anna and Elise lifted their heads. Their faces, seen now in the softer light that mingled candle glow with the first hints of day-filtered gray at the window, seemed even more gentle. "How is the morning?" Anna asked quietly. Clara took off her gloves and unwound her scarf, feeling the last touch of cold leave her skin. "Very quiet," she said, "very soft. The sky is waking slowly. A single star is still watching." Elise smiled at that, her eyes half closing as though she could imagine it clearly. "Then perhaps the night is leaving us a guardian," she murmured. "Something to remember it by." They moved together through the final small tasks of their shift, each motion unhurried, almost ceremonial. The last candles were left to burn themselves out. There was no need to snuff them. The ledgers were stacked neatly. The headsets were hung in their places, their curved metal bands catching the faint, new light from the window. The boards, with their resting lamps and coiled cords, looked less like instruments of work now, and more like sleeping companions. The telephone wires above the roof would carry other voices in the day, brisk and practical, full of business and arrangements. But for the moment, they seemed content simply to hum gently in the quiet, holding the memory of all the soft, nighttime words they had borne. When their tasks were finished, the three young women stood together for a brief moment in the center of the room. No one felt the need to speak much. The bond between them, forged in silence and shared attention, required few explanations. They exchanged small, tired smiles, and in those smiles lay gratitude for one another, for the work, for the night that had passed so gently. Then, one by one, they reached for their coats and hats, preparing to step out into the slowly brightening town, each to return to her own small corner of the world, carrying a piece of the night with her. Clara paused with her hand on the latch, looking back once more at the exchange. She saw not only the modest room she had spent so many hours in, but also the invisible work that had happened there. The threads of connection spun out across snow and fields and rivers, weaving the town and the surrounding villages into a single, peaceful web. She thought of all those who still slept, their dreams perhaps made softer by the sound of a beloved voice heard through the wires. She thought of the morning that would come fully soon, fires stoked, curtains drawn back, bread broken, children's footsteps on cold floors. The night's gentleness, she felt, would linger quietly in those ordinary moments, invisible yet present, like a faint scent of pine and wax that clung to the edges of memory. Stepping outside again, she was greeted by a sky that now held clear, pale colors, tender and calm. The snow shone more brightly, yet its brightness was not harsh. It was soft and even, as if inviting quiet steps rather than loud ones. The air felt cool and clean in her lungs, smoothing away the last traces of exhaustion without disturbing the inner calm the night had given her. As she walked homeward through the silvered streets, she listened once more to the town's deep, peaceful silence. Nothing in it asked for hurry. Everything seemed to say, rest, breathe, be gentle. And now, as this long, candlelit story reaches its own quiet dawn, may its softness linger around you like the last calm hour before morning. May the snow in your thoughts lie smooth and peaceful. May the wires above your own sleeping town hum with kindness. May every distant voice you have loved feel nearer, as if carried to you along some quiet silver line. May your worries loosen and drift away like clouds at the edge of the sky, leaving only a clear, gentle space within you. And as you close your eyes, may you feel the blessing of this small, watching exchange of Clara and her companions, of the stars and the snow and the tender night, resting softly over you, and may you drift into a deep, quiet, and beautifully peaceful sleep.